Hey everyone, and welcome to Almost Cancelled. I'm Peter, and I'm going to be talking about Unbelievable Episode 2 from Netflix. Full spoilers, of course, for the episode. And this episode is very different to the first one. It does obviously still have Marie in some capacity. In fact, I was a little bit confused about that at first because there does seem to be a time jump for the rest of the episode in terms of the plot. We start with her on the bridge, and she decides not to jump, of course, which is what we kind of expected, but we get more scenes with her later in the episode, and we jump ahead in time for the other case that we're introduced to. But the scenes with Marie, which at first I thought were also 3 years later, as the episode went on, seemed to actually still be set right after the previous episode. It seemed to be in the direct aftermath of the attack and the fallout from her essentially being kind of railroaded into falsified or saying that it was false. We have a little bit of Marie, and we have her again being kind of treated poorly by those around her. The people who live in the same building as her give her a lot of shit. The girl who comes and picks her up from the bridge says, "Don't make me do that again." I was in pajamas. She's very confrontational with her. And she's given extra curfew. She's giving sort of basically a punishment for what she did, for lying as they see it. And all of this is again piling on just how difficult it is to watch her go through this, and all the extra stuff she's having to sort of sift through on top of the experience that she's had. And she ultimately, the big scene with her though, I felt, was where she tries to go to is Colleen, the foster mom she really liked, and she goes to her house, and she's not there. The husband's there that we saw briefly last episode, and he's very nice to her. And he's happy to see her, and he gives her a hug, and is very kind of caring. And she says, "Oh well, I thought I'd maybe come over and watch this TV show with Colleen. It'd help take my mind off things." And he's like, "Yeah, that's a great idea, but she's not here. She's at like a town meeting or whatever. It's like the local, I don't know, residential meeting or something." And she's like, "Well, I mean, I can wait." And he's like, "Well, she's going to be a while." And she's like, "Well, I can watch on my own." And he very awkwardly has to explain that he's not comfortable with that. That because she is in everyone's eyes, lied to the police and claimed that this attack happened, which they don't think did. He's concerned that he doesn't want to be left alone with her. He doesn't want to be there with just her and Colleen not being there, because he's terrified that she might do something similar and say that he did something. And because of what he does, because he's a foster father, because they take in a lot of kids, he can't have something like that on his record or on his kind of reputation. And this is a heartbreaking scene to watch, because she just like really starts to break down throughout this. She starts to cry and ultimately just leaves. And he tries to say, "Hey, you can come back later. I'll get her to come pick you up," or something like that. He feels awful having to say this, but he's worried about what could happen should she turn around and say something else after this. And again, it's this idea that she has been treated as if she's the one who did something wrong. And obviously, she's been kind of like forced to say that she did do something wrong. And we're dealing with that. But this scene, I think, really hits the drama and the emotion of just the further fallout that, like, I wasn't even sure we were going to get. I genuinely thought we were just going to skip ahead to the next case and not see her again until the detectives sort of like traced it back to this case, traced it back to her, and then we would see her again. So very heartbreaking scene to watch, and because no one in the scene itself is a villain, because he's a very kind of understandable dude. The way he comes across, he doesn't sound like he's being malicious or mean or vindictive or anything like that. He doesn't sound like he's being ridiculous. Based on what he's heard, based on what he knows, he seems like he's fairly forthcoming about this stuff. And she, has to hear this, and so it's a really tough scene to watch. But that's all about the case. That's all about the new case. 2011. And we have this new victim, and we have a new cop. We have Merritt Weaver plays the character of Karen Duvall, who is this police officer. And right away, there's an interesting comparison to the first episode, because our main investigator is a woman. And it's one of the things that I said in the last episode, is that it was very notable that everyone who talked to her from the police were all men. And this is very different. And it's not to say that men, a man in this role can't be sympathetic and can't handle the situation with the right tact, but immediately there is a contrast here where Karen is very sort of soft with how she approaches the victim who I believe name was Amber, and she one of the things that I was really noticing is that when she's asking for her statement when she arrives at the scene, she's very kind of like explains why it's needed. She explains why it's important, and she keeps saying, if that's okay, we could do this now. If this is okay, we could do it a little bit later. Maybe it's a little too impersonal here. Why don't we go and speak it by car, which is a bit more private? She keeps doing her best to offer why everything's been asked of her. She keeps saying, here's the reason why I'm asking this, and here's the reason why I have to actually relive this with me for a minute, because all the details are important, and all these details will help catch someone. And the quicker you give us details, the quicker we can hopefully investigate and catch them. And she really makes it clear the importance of why everything has to be done quickly, and why everything has to be in such excruciating detail. And more so when they go into the apartment afterwards, because she wants her to go in and look around and see, hey, anything that he might have touched, point it out. And she does that. And at one point, she mentions a detail that she forgot to mention in her first account of the case, which we don't even get to hear until a little bit later. This episode's a little bit interesting in the sense that it kind of shifts the focus from the victim to the investigator. The investigator is very much the main character in this episode, which was not true in the last one. In fact, speaking of the investigator for the last episode, I should probably just briefly mention, before we jump ahead in time, there is a scene where we see that investigator, Officer Parker, I believe his name was, Detective Parker, yeah. He is basically closing the case on the computer. He just clicks close, it's done. And there's a little bit of doubt because he's looking at the photographs of her examination, of Marie's examination, and he's a little bit of doubt there. But he kind of puts him down, he closes the case, he's not really satisfied, and he gets a call from this sort of reimbursement's not the right victim support kind of thing, and he basically has to explain, no, the case is closed, it was all falsified. And the guy says, well, that's something, but hey, one less rape in the world, I mean, that's good, right? And they both kind of shrug their shoulders and go, yeah, I guess. And that's when it goes to the title. It's a very kind of nonchalant, just how they kind of wrap up the case, as if it's not a big deal to them. For Marie, this is earth-shattering. Her life is not the same anymore. She can't process thought the way she did before. Everything's a struggle. We've seen her struggle. We'll see her struggle throughout the rest of this episode in our scenes as we see. And to them, it's just, well, case closed. Click the box, and that's it, over. So, anyway, we go back to the victim of this episode, Amber, and Detective Duval, Karen. And she gets to this duvet, this comforter, and she says, oh, he put that over me when I was cold. I forgot to mention that. And Karen doesn't then sort of get accusatory. Karen doesn't say, oh, why didn't you say that before? Karen says, oh, it's okay, I understand. This is why we do this, to sort of draw out more details. And she's very sympathetic. I mean, hell, at one point, she asks her in the car, have you contacted your parents or any friends, kind of thing, and told them about this shit? And she says no. And Amber immediately starts trying to explain why. She's like, well, I don't feel comfortable yet talking to them, and I'm not. And Karen just very quickly says, well, you don't have to explain it. You don't have to explain your decisions. It's up to you when you tell people. I just, I have to know. I have to ask these questions and find out because as we know from the last episode, talking to other people she's told is also part of the process. But it's up to her when she tells someone. And that's kind of a big moment that happens later on when she's at the hospital, which again, Karen takes her to the hospital. She doesn't just send her there. She takes her, she accompanies her, and she sort of assures her that she knows the nurses and the doctors that are going to be performing these exams, and she takes her in. It's a very soft touch the entire time. It's this kind of attitude that's very understanding of the victim and clearly treats them as if they've been through something traumatic. Even though Amber, in contrast to Marie, actually comes across as very upbeat about the whole thing almost. And that's a weird thing to say, but she does. It's almost like she's in denial, or she's trying to hide any kind of emotion from what's happened. She's very yep, it happened at this time, and I called, and she's almost too smiley. And it's actually very interesting, and from a performance and direction point of view, the moment that first kind of breaks, it's when they're in the car and she says, hey, like, we're going to send you to the hospital to examine you, but if it's okay with you, I would like to take a swab myself of your face. And Amber even explains the guy's MO, because obviously it'd been a TV show, we know it's the same person, just as a viewer. The attacker, his procedure has evolved and has gotten more kind of rigid, because he made her shower and wash her face, clearly in an attempt to disguise any DNA evidence that might be left behind. And he takes like everything, most of the stuff that he touches, he takes with him, all this kind of stuff. Like, he's really like covering his tracks. But she tries to take a swab from her face anyway, and this is the moment where she's being touched by the little swab, as she's sort of right up and down her face and across her forehead. This is the first moment where you can see the uncomfort, the discomfort, the thing she's bottling and not letting out. You can see it in her face. Like, she gets very uncomfortable at being touched, and it's the first sign that something, outside of like her just outright saying things, it's the first real sort of physical sign that we can see visually that something has really affected her. And again, it goes back to what we said last episode about there's a number of reactions to this. There's lots of different ways someone can process this, knowingly or unknowingly. And so it really plays as a great contrast to that first episode and how it's handled. And she she goes to the hospital with her and explains all this stuff and says, I can't stay with you during the examination. And she's very apologetic about it. She has to go back to the case, but is there someone you could call, kind of thing. And then when she comes out, she comes and sees her at the end of the examination, after going through what she was told to an old detective at the crime scene. And we hear a lot of the details here, how she was forced to dress up in certain ways and act in certain ways. Things that he said to her, like that she should take better care of herself and get a better door, or a slider door, should be better secured. And told her his philosophy of life. That it seems like he might have been in the military or something like that. He's travelled, he can speak a few languages. We learn a lot of details. And again, we get differences in demeanors, like between Karen and the male cop who's there listening to this, who just kind of almost like gives these stock shock reactions to the scene, to what he's been told, where he's like, "Oh, geez, that's messed up," and it comes across as very kind of just like the stock like answer to stock reaction, I should say, to what she just said, but. She goes and sees her afterwards at the hospital and says, "Have you got someplace you want to stay?" Because she doesn't want to go home, naturally. And she calls a friend. And this is one of the moments where I really point out the filmmaking here and the choice and where the camera is and the choice of what we're focusing on. Because when she calls her friend, presumably, and from everything we know, the first person she's told, outside of the police, outside of strangers that she doesn't already know, the first person she's told as a threat either from her friends or her family, what's happened to her, that she's been raped, is we don't stay on her. We actually focus on Karen. The camera kind of comes round and we never see her face. We can hear she's crying. We can hear that it's a very emotional moment for her. But we don't focus on her. We focus on Karen, who's got her back turned, and we're sort of like looking at her, just sort of listening to it. And for two reasons. One, because obviously, like I said, Karen is more the main character of this episode. It's more looking through her lens than it is the victim's lens in this case. But the other thing here is just to emulate how she's treating the victim. If you remember in the first episode, all the characters who demanded or asked questions or asked for statements would just very point blank say, "We need a statement, start talking," kind of thing. And there would be no real hands off. There'd be no consideration really to this sort of extent. Whereas here, it's more like Karen respects what she's going through and her privacy and her own, like, some of this really just belongs to her and she has to be allowed to have that. And obviously she can hear the conversation, but she's, this idea that the camera does not focus on Karen, it does focus on Karen, it doesn't focus on Amber, and we stay with Karen, is that it's symbolic that just like, because on last episode, whenever Marie was asked questions, the camera was dead on Marie. When Marie had to talk to anyone, the camera was dead on Marie. We got everything. We saw every little twitch in her face. We saw everything. We were invasive. Here, the camera doesn't focus on her. The camera focuses on Karen because that's A, who we're following, and B, it emulates the fact that she's respecting Amber enough to give her this moment and let it be hers. And the direction does that really well. So well directed again, which is great. So let's talk about Karen some more, because that's really a lot of what the rest of the episode is. We know she has kids, and her husband. At first, I thought it was a stay-at-home dad. It sounds from the end of the episode, it's more like he's also a cop, but he works night shift. They kind of essentially swap shifts. So she's out being an investigator during the day. He's doing whatever specific role he has in the force, but they seem to work at different precincts based on the final scene that they have together. But she comes home and she's with him, and he's made dinner, and she's eating dinner, and she mentions the new case, and she doesn't want to talk about it, but then she says what it is, and then it cuts to them on the couch, and she's really explaining a lot of the details, and he's just sitting there listening and sort of letting her vent about this horrible sort of day she's had, where she's had to sort of go through this experience with this victim, because obviously it's a very hard job. There's nothing about this that's easy. And the big notable thing, of course, is at the end of the scene, where just before he leaves, because he goes to the safe, because the moment that reveals that he's also a cop is when she puts her gun, and they've got a safe in their kitchen next to the back door. We see another sort of belt with the gun and stuff in there, and he's going to take that out, and it's just as he's doing that where he says, "Was this guy wearing a backpack?" And she hasn't mentioned that yet, but she's mentioned a lot of his attitude and the sort of how prepared he was and all that kind of thing. And we get the sense that throughout the episode there's little details of evidence that suggest that he was watching the victim for a long time, all that kind of thing. And he says, if you're wearing a backpack, you should probably phone our precinct, because we had one like that. And she's like, "Oh, who's the detective?" And this actually leads into the final scene, which is the introduction of Toni Collette's character, whose name is Grace Rasmussen. I'll find out how to pronounce it next episode. But this is actually my one complaint about the episode, is this. I missed a scene where she goes to speak to a neighbor. Don't worry, I'll go back and talk about that. But Toni Collette's introduction is actually the one scene in this episode that I think feels a little bit off to me. Just because it kind of plays it like it's from a different show. It feels like it's from I don't like when we say an action show. It doesn't feel like that, but it's trying to make her kind of be the cool badass kind of cop, right? Which is fine, but the way it kind of introduces her, and she's swearing a lot, and she's she's sort of she's got her earphones in and she's listening to music in her car, but then she sees someone all in black with a backpack out in this kind of forest area behind the apartment buildings. Not the one that we've seen in this episode. What we discover here, because I think the obvious assumption when he says we had one like that is that it's going to tie into Marie's story from the first episode. But the impression I actually get, because we go to Toni Collette and not Parker, is that no, this is a more recent example. This is something, this person's been doing this for a long time, even though he claimed to Amber that this was his first time. Amber doesn't believe him, and no, there's been another recent example. It's going to be a while before we get back to Marie. I mean, it might be quicker than I think, but there's cases in between. It's not just that one, then this one. And she kind of swears a lot, says "who the F for you" kind of thing, and that's kind of where the episode ends. It was just the way they introduced it. It wasn't super over the top. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't like they had her sliding over the car and dropping a one-liner or anything like that. But it felt like it was trying to be a little bit more, I don't know, cool than the rest of the show, and it felt just a little bit out of tone, just a little bit, not like a ton, just a little bit. It almost felt like, because it's Toni Collette, because she is the star of the show, she's the biggest name they've got. They spent they waited 2 whole episodes almost to build up to her, and she has this big entrance, and they wanted to kind of give it a lot, and it almost feels like being this flashy with her, again, comparatively speaking, just in the way it's handled compared to everything else. Just felt a little bit over top to me. And again, in context of everything else in the show, not over the top compared to actual over the top action introductions or anything like that. I don't know. It felt like she's meant to be the cool cop, I guess, and I don't know. That felt weird to kind of introduce a character like that. It feels like something out of more of a fun story as opposed to this very serious, sensitive story that we're actually dealing with. So yeah, the scene that I missed is Some of the neighbors talked about some weird, male characters that might be suspects, and one of them was this guy who has a light that he wears on his head, and he lives in the building where Amber lived, and Karen comes by and comes in and goes to speak to him, wants to speak to him, and turns out he lives with his mother, and he does seem to have learning difficulties. He seems to be. I don't know if I don't want to just assume autism, but something like that, where he lives at home because he's not necessarily fit to completely function on his own, and the mother is happy to talk about it. Says, "Oh, I heard about it today," and so on and so on. And Karen asks, where were you guys? Blah blah blah. Like, oh yeah, we were away for the weekend, 4-day trip. A bunch of us go out every year to wherever. And she's like, oh, that's great. Can someone corroborate, the people who you were with? Will they sort of say you were both there? And immediately that's when this woman gets very offended and says, someone's accused my son, haven't they? And she's like, if anyone got to know him. And Karen tries to, no one's accused him of anything. This is purely about ruling everyone out, ruling anyone out who's close by, so we can focus on people who are. And she doesn't, say all those exact words, but that's what she's trying to say. But she doesn't really get a chance to finish any of her sentences. This woman is just kind of livid that anyone's saying this about her son, that anyone thinks this about her son, and gets very defensive. And you understand why she's getting defensive. It's a horrible thing to be accused of, obviously. But at the same time, this is clearly just procedure of ruling people out. No, I mean, especially given the description of how the person spoke, of how the man interacted with Amber, the second he speaks to her for more than a sentence, when he answers the door, we know as the audience that he is very, very unlikely to be the suspect, to be the perpetrator. He is far too different from what we got told. This guy can speak 4 languages, that he is well traveled, that he thinks he's smarter than everyone else because he's thought of everything ahead. And this guy with the flashlight in his head doesn't really strike you as that. He's someone who is not capable of what this guy has done. Not in the way he's done it, certainly. So that was an interesting scene, just to kind of show. No, I mean, because obviously a lot of the last episode was showing how the system and the people in the system can sometimes be a detriment to actually helping with these crimes. I think this scene was to show how other people around can be a bit of a detriment, and not like in a huge way in this case, because I'm sure it isn't going to slow down the case that much. He's not really affected it in any way. But how this attitude, let's say she was more important to the case, how this attitude could be a problem, how it could get in the way, how it could make, and not even in a because obviously Karen, ultimately she can't block anything, but more in the sense that she's making Karen's job just that bit more difficult and that bit more stressful than it needs to be, if nothing else. So interesting scene in that sense. So, no, I mean, the episode was really solidly directed again. Performances were good. In fact, Merritt Weaver, who plays Karen, I forgot to mention, I recognized her immediately, and I did remember where I knew her from. She was actually in a previous Netflix limited series. She was in Godless, which came out about 2 years ago, I want to say now. It was a 7-episode Western, which was actually very good. Mainly for the filmmaking. It was a really stylistic and great-looking show, and it had Jeff Daniels in it. It had Scoot McNairy, had a bunch of noteworthy people in there that you'll recognize from other things. So I recommend that one if you haven't seen it. But yeah, solid episode 2. Like I say, last scene with Toni Collette felt just a little bit out of tone for the show, but not by like a silly amount, just a little bit. I'm looking forward to the next episode and seeing how we progress with this, and seeing these two team up, because that seems to be where it's going, is Toni Collette and Merritt Weaver's characters teaming up and trying to solve this, especially now that they have this idea that there's a serial rapist on the loose. It's not just like 2 isolated incidents, it's something, and then if it's a serial case, then they can start looking back and see if there's more cases that match it, and that will lead to Marie. So so pretty solid. I will see you guys next time for episode 3. Let me know what you thought of episode 2 in the comments below. You can like and subscribe, all that stuff. Get me on the Twitters at mail_fuzz for channel updates. You can get me specifically on Twitter at Wibble89 just for random personal bullshit, if nothing else. You can obviously support everything we do by going to patreon.com/MaileFuzzTV and supporting us for as little as $1 per month, and it helps keep all the content coming, and you get some bonuses and stuff like that. But you can also support us in free ways, such as rating the podcast feed on like Apple Podcasts, 5 stars or whatever. Helps more people find us, helps spread the show a little bit more, and obviously share us out if you think other people would enjoy our discussions of various TV shows and our movie podcasts and everything else. So yeah, go check out everything else we do, whether it's MaileFuzz TV on YouTube or go to the Patreon and you can see a list of all the audio feeds we have for all different shows. But yeah, that is us, so thank you. That is me, rather. It's not two of us, just me in this one. But that's me, so thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV, guys. Have you got any vanilla?